that it was kind of inevitable that humans would find something either in place of or similar to religion. And it was in the sense that humans are just naturally seem to be inclined towards like imagination, creativity, and telling stories like that. And also for we can't find the answer to something, we put something to fill it in. But also especially like as with industrialization keeps going, I think in like not to like back to like another reading, but it is these gaps get smaller. And so, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Gaps? Which gaps? I'm just curious.
The gaps which God can hide in.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and so we like to make things grand, and like it's kind of like a child who like doesn't know that there isn't a monster under the bed, or that the big shadow isn't like some big scary thing they don't know about. As they get older, even if they find out what it is, that fear and like genuine thing is still real. It still is valid. And same way that a child makes up something that they can't explain.
Good. Thank you. Rebecca, what you got?
Yeah, so we all kind of were agreeing like if religion didn't exist, yes, it would. Like it would eventually still like happen. Like none of us can really imagine a world where like religion of any kind is non-existent, but we were more speculating on like, Europe would probably have still colonized a bunch of other countries, including America, but like, what if America was colonized without Christianity? What would the culture look like now? Or what would like European culture look like without its Christian influences? Like, and it was like specifically Christianity because of like how kind of power driven it tends to be. Like, what would the world be like without that religion? Or like, what if America was colonized with Buddhism instead? Like, what would we be like? And we just were talking about like, time traveling back and like, changing something in the course of history that would make that happen. But I really can't think of it. I guess it's just because I'm so used to living in the world that I live in. It's like hard for me to imagine a different way or like a different reality where that doesn't happen or where there's a substitute. I can only imagine removing some religions. And then even in that case, like maybe a lot of the structures that they existed in would still be there. It's complicated.
Awesome. Of course it's complicated. Good. Arthur.
Yeah, we were talking about how like if people didn't attach themselves to religion, they would attach themselves to like other concepts, basically with the same amount of like fervor. And I guess I mentioned like Nazi Germany and like how like yeah, they definitely had like religious things still, but their like main focus was based on like biology and like their like messed up version of science. So like that was like the main like that kind of like extremism like can go in like any direction basically.
Very good. Thank you. Anybody else? I'm looking at Brittany's comments here.
Our group kind of said the same thing. We kind of said that even if it isn't a god specifically, like what is a religion but a belief in what you believe to be the truth, or trying to find the truth to how your world works, I guess. If it weren't for religion, then it would be something else. And on an individual basis, I think people can live without religion, like, and find the comfort and fulfillment in their life. But on a large scale, I don't think you'll ever be able to completely get rid of it. You know what I mean?
Awesome. Thank you, Tobias. I appreciate that. I'm just looking at Brittany's comment here in the chat. We hypothesize, we accept that we may never know the answer to big questions, and maybe we could exist without religion because we'd eliminate a huge part of why religion exists. if we would culturally, gosh, that's a good point, Brittany. Could we ever get to a point where we accepted that we may not know these answers to these questions? Be like, oh, I guess I'll stop asking. Oh, Gia, what's up?
Something that I didn't mention, but the more we talk, I'm thinking about, is I think that without religion, government would fail. I know that there's supposed to be a separation of government and religion, but a lot of religious texts like influences you to be a good Samaritan and a good person,
Yeah.
and it like tells you, oh, if you're not a good person or you're not a good Samaritan, like, you know, you'll fall to the wrath of God, or, you know, you'll be punished. And I feel like if we didn't have like people who believed in a religion, we would have more chaos than not. If that makes any sense. And people wouldn't be able to coexist.
Good point. Yeah, interestingly, some of the Enlightenment thinkers who were at the forefront of secularism, like Rousseau in particular, Rousseau argues at the end of the social contract that he really can't foresee a functioning government that exercises authority without a civil religion. Very interesting discussion and a little bit surprising. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris, I see you had your hand up.
Okay, yeah, I think it's, I think similar to what Tobias's group was saying, or like part of another thing is that we think that as a society, I think you could live without religion, but I think like individually is where it's like it becomes a bit more of like a different area, because I feel like individually, you know, like each individual person, someone may just accept things as they are, another person might be like, well, you know, maybe this is why, or like there has to be another reason for this or another creature behind all this. And so it is that thing where it's like on an individual scale, I don't think that it could be just like eradicated from every human. Like, I mean, it's also like life would be boring without something to like, you know, keep your mind running like that.
Awesome. Thank you. Raven.
In our group, authors talk about the Nazis. They seem like believe in eugenics and racial superiority, and something pick up from some modern science. And we talk about what exactly is religion. Is that
Yes.
People believe in a certain god or gods, or just a faith or belief itself. So people may not believe in this god or the other one, but they'll probably always seek something to believe in. It's like maybe ideology, maybe principles, or maybe virtues, some kindness, or some extreme things. So people can live without this religion concept about God, but they always have something to believe in.
Thank you, Raven. Oh, Zach, did you want to speak up or no?
No, I kind of lost my train of thought.
No worries. All right, well, that's okay. Maybe you want to chime in the next part, because you guys are, you know, a couple of you now here specified, said, well, what do we mean by religion? Well, I think this will come to the fore when I ask you about the substitutes. What are the substitutes, or what substitutes might people find in this age of secularism? What all did you come up with? Other people. Yes. Well, that's a little general, Sonny. Okay, Zach, you got it.
Yeah, I mean, I think finding a substitute kind of depends on what we're saying religion is providing us. So like, I feel like a common idea about the main reasons it really exists, or like we're saying, we've said like community is one, like purpose, like individual purpose is like another one. And like, I feel like as long as we can find other things that fulfill the same needs that religion is fulfilling, of course we can find a replacement for religion. I feel like you could say that about like kind of anything that's significant in someone's life, really.
Oh, and let me specify, and this gets to what you were talking about earlier, Zach, under substitute, that could be new religions. right? That could be other religions. It's funny, as you were speaking, I was just specifying my question and I put it in the chat. When I talk about a substitute, I'm asking, like, what do you see that would function as a substitute? What could function as a substitute for religion in the lives of people? And just to specify, would that be other religions too? Irish.
There was like also, okay, I'm gonna mention again another Jason Silva. So he did a video of like,
Man, this guy's the bomb, huh? I got to check him out.
he mentioned something how like when Nietzsche said that God is dead, people turn into their lovers. And so like the moment that God is dead, like so they just believe in their lovers, and so they deify their lovers and give it like they become their salvation. And so it kind of is like really codependency, which is, but he said something about that where like we look into
Guy
others.
is a fucking genius, because I wrote an article about that a few years ago, romance. I was arguing that romance and love has kind of taken on like, yeah, it has become a quasi-religious devotional object in our life. I had a professor in grad school. I went in Belgium, and he said he was one of these guys who tried to be alarming. And he said, love did not exist before the 1800s. And we're all like, what the fuck, man? You're full of shit. And then we all thought about it. It's like, oh, yeah, he's kind of right. And the way, this is how he's right. You didn't I can speak confidently for the Western world, and my wife's family's from the Middle East. You didn't marry for love. No way. People didn't start waiting for love until, gosh, I can tell you my grandparents didn't marry for love. So maybe 60 years ago. Marrying for love, romantic love is a recent thing, you know, in much of the world. And I think that the Silva guy is on to something. That's something that we elevate to the status of a love. Good. I like it. Anybody else want to weigh in? Other likely substitutes? Well, Aiden mentioned cults. There have been sociologists who have made that argument, actually. Where do you see cults? You see cults in Western nations that are secularizing, and industrial nations that are secularizing. Japan has had its fair share of cults. Arthur? Oh, is that Arthur? Yeah, Arthur.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, I was talking to my group about, there's like a TikTok going around of like this woman, and she's like, oh, we're the children of the earth, and we like all live in they're all white, and they're like, we live in Guatemala, and like we all live together, and we all eat together, and we play together, like one of those deals. And you go on their website, and it's like just this white dude who's like called like an event master, and like
their cult. It's a cult.
Yeah, it's a cult. But it's one of those like, oh, we're communal, like nature people, even though they're like rich white people, like having Guatemalan people like serve them and stuff.
Well, in case I haven't mentioned it before, I'm going to make a plug for Wild Wild West, the documentary about a cult out in Oregon in the 80s. Very enlightening. Rebecca.
Yeah, just on the subject of cults, I recently watched this video about one in South Korea called Unification Church, and it was like this big guy who like he wanted to like create a new like race of people, but he wanted to like unify different kinds of people, but he's like, all you guys have to get married and have kids that are like part of the pure new race that we're gonna make, and like all the other people stuck, we gotta like take over. And so he still would hold them like through COVID, like these mass weddings where he'd marry like tons of people off all at once, so that they would like, you know, go out and create more people in his like society. It's like totally crazy. And of course, you know, you end up hearing that like a lot of the people in there were abusive and like, you know, were controlling all these people. And so it's like this kind of, because it was like Christianity adjacent, but not necessarily Christian. Yeah, I think so. I think so, Em. I can't remember what their names were, but it was like this crazy story. And so I just think like, yeah, people are gonna find some sort of strange substitution for religion, or like take religion to a whole new like level. If especially like it seems like the more society secularizes, the more super religious people really like hold on to whatever they were believing.
We have several international students in this class, and I want to make sure we don't lose them. You guys all are familiar with a cult, what a cult is. A cult. Now, I've mentioned this before, I think in class. Cultus in Latin just means worship. So the word cult has like an old non-judgmental meaning in English, just means like a system of worship. In the last 50 years, it's taken on a whole different sense. How would you guys define a cult?
Maybe like a belief system that revolves around like a person.
They tend to have an iconic personality that they rally around. Thank you, Aiden. That's awesome. Gia?
A lot of times it's someone who puts himself out as someone who is like someone who talks to God, or who is like religious, or has some kind of spiritual communication, and then people follow them to hear the word of that God.
Okay. Awesome. Finn?
I was gonna say it's important to point out that like this is sinister because, or it has sinister connotations.
It does.
Because of how these people bring in financial things
Yes.
of their followers. They bring in like emotional things. It's usually revolved around mutual trauma, or
Yes.
focusing on people who are the most susceptible
Yes.
to invoke into the community. So it is a very predatory thing. It's not just like, this guy thinks he's a messiah, haha, how cute. It's like, no, give me your money.
Yeah.
Best thing ever. I think if you're ever confused about cults, just watch a little video about Jonestown, or is it Jamestown?
Jonestown.
Jonestown.
James
Because that's
is a different
quintessential cult, you know.
There is a fair degree of brainwashing that goes on. And just to fill in some details for international students, Finn mentions Jonestown, which is one of the more notorious incidents of a cult. That was 1979. A man by the name of his last name was Jones. He takes his cult with him to a city in Guyana, and they create a city in Guyana in South America. And a congressman from California goes to that cult to try and save a daughter of someone he knew, like a constituent or something. And while he's there, he gets into a conflict and is killed. And then the Jones and his followers commit suicide all at the same time. Around 1,000 of them, I think. There was another example of a cult in San Diego about 20 years ago, where the members all dressed in the same outfit, white outfits with white sneakers, and they committed suicide at the same time. They were all found in their bunk beds in their dormitory. So this is very alarming, because I see your hand, Chris. Let me just get this point out before I forget it. You know, we see this in a lot of Heaven's Gate, in a lot of the Western world, which is very, you know, these are very popular in some very secular societies. They have succeeded in recruiting in some extremely secularized societies, like in Quebec, in Canada, which is very secular, in Switzerland and France, which is very secular. And it's very surprising. Why would people in secular societies gravitate to the most, you know, the most obedient, the most, you know, yeah, the most, I'm sorry, I can't think of a better word, the most slavish form of religiosity, where you are brainwashed? This is very troubling to sociologists who wonder, what what is this saying about the society? And I'd like to also point out that there were a good number of Europeans, and I mean like Europeans that were white Europeans who joined ISIS. There was a whole group of Dutch women that they found in ISIS camps who had married ISIS soldiers, you know, coming from Holland, which is extremely permissive and, you know, non-judgmental, to join the exact opposite society is more than surprising. All right, Chris, you have the floor.
Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, going back to like a couple weeks ago where like, you know, I guess I did mention like the military can be seen as a cult by many people, the way that it operates. And it's like, I think it's also part of these things about cults, like there's this level of silence, this level of unquestioning, and just, you know, like, I lost my train of thought, but it's also, I mean, you know, it might just be because like, what I've been like researching and whatever. But like it reminded me also of like you know, Yukio Mishima, very controversial right-wing Japanese figure, and you know, his attempted coup. And it's like the way that some people like are elevated in the eyes of like, you know, their followers to like this untouchable status of just blind following is very frightening.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like sometimes it is slightly more frightening than following like, you know, a figure who we don't even know exists, like God. But yeah, and so it's, you know, like I think stuff like military and nationalism can be seen as a cult in that regard, and in
Excellent.
that like complete disregard for others' humanity.
Right. You know what, we're batting around this idea that religion, I put this in the chat, that religion is a kind, and this is speaking of what Tobias was getting at earlier, you know, how are we defining religion as a kind of collective expression where you find meaning or purpose. There are many who are wondering about the rise of right-wing nationalism in, again, secular Europe. And why is that the case? And some scholars speculate that's because, you know, this is a substitute for religion. This is, you know, what the nation, the idea of a nation has almost mythological connotations in nationalism, right? It's elevated some kind of transcendent entity. It's like an object of worship, right? Martial arts. Okay, yes. Well, martial arts, interesting, Park. Martial arts, I mean, they arguably have a religious foundation in many
Like
cases.
in some China like martial art places, they like bring a lot of people inside, so they are using it as like god power stuff. Like they can make a wind and the stuff. So
that's right. Yeah. Do we have any students from China in this class?
Yeah, me.
Who said that?
Raven.
Oh,
Me.
okay. Oh, we do. We have a couple. Good. China is arguably a very secularized society, since the ruling government is officially atheist. But what would you guys have to say about religion in China? Are people gravitating towards it?
I think there are many different kinds of religion or belief, because it's very complicated. Like in my family, there are some minority ethnics, and they believe in different gods, like Buddha and some just nature stuff. But belief is different from the older generation. People is like they pray to a god for maybe success, for health, and the virtue is another thing in the traditional culture. So it's quite different from the Westerners. It's like the moral system is outside of the religion.
Yes, China is very complicated.
And many people, they are not really atheists and not really religious people. They just something between.
Very good. There were other students. Anybody? Was there somebody else who wanted to? Jojo, were you going to chime in?
Yeah, it's like in China, it's kind of like complicated. Like we do have like religious, but like somehow we also have like communism. So it's kind of like, it's really hard to like balance that. So for example, it's like my family, if they're like work for the government, like if they're like political party member, it's like they're not allowed to have religious. So it's kind of like a hard thing to say.
Yeah. I've read some pieces about the popularity of certain religions in China. But as you both have indicated, religion in China is a very complicated story. For reasons we can get into later. I'm not going to dive in now. It's a little too complex at this point. But, some speculate that we might see in these secularizing societies, we might see a bounce back towards religion, or towards what kind of religion. And I'm going to speak to something Zach raised earlier. There are some who speculate that the rise of paganism is exactly that, or the return of paganism is a reaction to secularism. Good. Anybody else want to chime in? About substitutes for religion? Nobody mentioned sports. I'm not surprised, you Micah people in your bubble. I go to Ravens games on occasion. I will give you a secret. I'm a sports fan. And I go to Ravens games on occasion, not too often because it's expensive. And the people there like to speak about it as their church. I can tell you in Europe, soccer is at a totally different level. These soccer games, these clubs. You know what I'm talking about, Tobias?
I do, because I used to work at a mall where a lot of for some reason there were a lot of French people there. Which disgusting, ew, France. But I think there was it was over the summer a couple of years ago, there was some ball game or whatever, and just a ton of Europeans would just hang out in the store right next to me on watching the soccer game on the big screen TV that's in the tech store or whatever. And then every now and again we just hear them all go, yeah. And I was just sitting there in my little tea shop
Well, what's funny? I watch a lot of the Premier League now. I've always liked soccer, but I started now that I actually can watch it. I do. And if you go to a sports match in America, it's still a rather individualized affair. You sit in your box, you boo, you cheer, whatever. Sometimes there's a wave, but not really. But I watch these Premier League games and I watch the La Liga in Spain. The fans sing together. They chant. It's a communal experience, and of course there's a different level of violence. I've only been to one soccer game in Europe in my life, and I made a mistake. It was France versus England, and I have to say the English fans are quite terrifying. I was scared for my life.
Can confirm, was in high school marching band, was next to the student section.
Yeah. So good, very good. Anybody else wanted to? Let's see here. We got some comments about yes. These soccer clubs. There was an article in the New York Times about this last week. I think it was about in Serbia, in Belgrade. These soccer clubs, they have such animosity towards one another. There's the pride for a club. It's almost on the level of a nation or a religion. Really, that's what I was getting at here. So again, the concern being that people, if religion is not animating is not an animating force in their life, they may look for other things. And of course, the big philosophical question is, is the substitute better than the original? I was kind of riffing off, is the cure worse than the illness? But, is the substitute better or worse than what they're leaving behind? And the reason I raised that question is because I think that really gets to the heart of what, Terry Eagleton is talking about. Here's your very smooth segue, y'all. This is what this really gets to the heart of what Eagleton is talking about, especially in his, his beef with Dawkins. Dawkins, we saw this. And Dennett had this narrative that, religion is a sign of humanity in its infancy, and this is something that humans will grow out of. And Eagleton wants you to know that he has a big problem with how Dawkins, or the Ditchkins, I should say, all of them, these Ditchkins guys, how they view human nature. He thinks they're grossly wrong. And so your understanding of religion and, or progress really has a lot to do with how you understand human nature. Yeah, good. So why don't we dive into Eagleton? Duking it out. Yeah, that would be pathetic. I think they're both 70 and overweight, so I don't know about that. But anyway, good. Right. Well, let me turn it over to you all. What does, let's dive into the text. What does he think? What does he think Dawkins gets wrong? Let's start a list. Who's going to start us off? All right. Who we got there? M.
One of the first things that he says that I noticed is that Dawkins is assuming that people believe in God to like give, I guess, like a point to existence. And he's like, that's not true. People don't believe in creationism because they want there to be meaning in the world.
Good. Sunny.
Oh, yeah, he does bring up a very good point about how religion is not an alternative to science, but rather that religion and science are about two different questions.
Good. Do you want to say what they are?
Oh, dang.
So all right. You can think on it.
Oh, dang. Oh, man. I forgot. It's been several days since I've read the text.
Think
so
about it. I'm going to move on to Rebecca, but think on that.
Okay.
Rebecca, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, this was in like our reading and response, but like the way he describes God as like a gloriously pointless like figure. So he's like, I mean, yeah, Ditchkins is right in that like God's pointless, but also like, I don't know, the way he explains it's kind of confusing, but he's basically like, well, yeah, God made us because he just freaking felt like it, man. Like he didn't, this wasn't some like deep need or like there's no inherent like necessity to our existence, basically. And then like he really just started going into like right after that, like some pretty cool stuff about Jesus. And I just really liked the quote where he said, truly civilized societies do not hold pre-dawn power breakfasts.
Yeah.
Like he's really getting into like, disagreeing with like these ideas that some scientists like, or Darwinists really like to say about like the inherent traits of humanity. Like he said, one of the best reasons for being a Christian is you don't like having to work. Like, yes. Yeah, I don't know. I thought that stuff was cool.
The Sabbath used to be the day of rest. Can you imagine? My father, who's in his 80s now, told me when he grew up, you were not allowed to drive your cars on Sunday in Belgium, where he's from. No driving. Can you imagine? Once upon a time, we had shops closed. Now we have 24-hour Walmart supercenters, even on Thanksgiving. God, that makes me angry. The Thanksgiving part. I mean, I don't like the other part, but I really don't like the Thanksgiving part. Natan.
Yeah, but Barry just stole my answer. I was gonna say how he said that God's glorious pointless. It's like yeah, he's just saying like he just made us because he's just like fuck him, make some humans.
Yeah.
And going my second part about the Shabbos or Sabbath. As a Jew, we don't drive on Saturday. Okay.
Well, certain ones.
Yeah,
certain ones of y'all.
All I do is sleep and eat. It's great.
Very good. Chris.
Yeah, I think actually one of the more interesting things from that passage was like, there was no reason for, God to make all this. And since we are made in God's image, and, he does everything just for his own whim and pleasure, then why can't we? And then I thought it was interesting that then he brings up Marx and like, all this about socialism. It's like, oh, that's a sexy point you made there.
Oh, I missed your last point. Can you say that again? About Marx?
Oh yeah, because he brings up how since we're made in God's image, why can't we also just like live in pleasure and have a good time? And then he brings up Marx and all of that, and it's like, well, the correlation between like these like teachings of Jesus and whatever, and this idea of God with like socialism and communism, I thought was really interesting.
Very good. Excellent. All right.
Wait, I forgot. But also like how, like the basis of like this leftist ideology does come from this idea of wanting better for humans and a basic love of humanity.
Good. All right, y'all. Thought question time. Remember my brilliant ingenuity thought question? All right, I'm going to put it in the chat. Get ready. I want you to write it out. It'll take a few minutes. Here it is, okay? What does it really mean to love your neighbor? And isn't there something outrageous in this command? Think hard. I'm giving you about 2 minutes to write this out. What does it really mean to love your neighbor? Eagleton suggests there's something outrageous in this. What is outrageous in that? Put your thumbs up when you're ready. Or post it in the chat. I see the hands. Let me give a minute for people to post stuff here. I want you all to finish thinking. Think about your neighbor. Do you really want to love that neighbor? All right. I'm seeing some things. Keep it coming here, but I will go down here. Natan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was gonna say like love your neighbor isn't like for me it's just like that all you treat people how you want to get treated. So it's like love for love or like for niceness for niceness. Like if you ain't a dick to me, I'm not gonna be a dick to you or something like that. And that just helps,
Good.
helps us build.
Natan, I'm not being nosy. I'm not. Who else do you love in your life?
My mama.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You love your mama like your neighbor?
No.
What the fuck?
My neighbor didn't breastfeed me.
Mm-hmm.
So well, love could be love could have many different terms. It could be like love, like I'm gonna have sex with you, love, or it could be you know what I'm saying, or it could be like friendly love, like we're cool about it,
Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No
Finn.
problem.
Finn, you're up.
That's very good. Just want you to know, my roomies all laughed out loud at you saying that your neighbor didn't breastfeed you. Very good response. 10 out of 10. Great. All right. But I was getting into is that I think saying love thy neighbor is a very, when Christians get into really bigoted water is when they directly interpret religious text. And I think that love thy neighbor obviously like is referring to not being a bigot, and I think that Eagleton and all these smart boys, Darwood Dawkins, them, the guys, the fellows, they're kind of interpreting it as, why is it outrageous? Because it is outrageous to like, you can't intimately love your neighbor. You can't love them like a family. You can't like, cherish them like you would the person that breastfed you, right? I mean, my ugly neighbor didn't carry me to term. My point is that it's about not being a bigot. It's about being respectful, and it's about cherishing their individuality and how that relates to you. And I think like in early, I mean, I'm talking kind of out of my ass because I don't know shit about the New Testament, but I think the reference of saying stuff like that in the point of view of Jesus Christ was that he was a Marxist that was sick of all the fighting. Mm-hmm. He was like, can't we just be buddies? Can't we just be friends? Can't we just love each other? And it got him killed. So that was I think that's the idea, is that you can really preserve your culture and your people and your identity by cherishing your community. And that is giving respect and not being a bigot and understanding others.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. You're up.
Yeah. So something that I was thinking about with love thy neighbor, I mean, I think something that often just pisses people off in general about that, like the way that Jesus like taught it was like both loving your neighbor and your enemy. People always hate the enemy part. They really can't stand that. But I was also thinking about what Eagleton was saying about Jesus and how he felt about the family and how the gospel felt about the family, and how they just really thought it was a waste of time, like they didn't care. And the way that he talked about love and how it's kind of been privatized, which is kind of a little bit of what we're getting at here, saying like, well, I wouldn't love my neighbor the same way I love my mom because she raised me. But I think kind of some of what he's getting at here is that like the reason you would love all people equally is because, especially back then when there was just less people on the planet, people were living more communally, and like the nuclear family as a concept was not really a thing. So your neighbor might have helped raise you, whereas now that's not very normal. And it seems like we're having like the same discussion in modern days some people were having back then, where like, I mean, I always hear conservatives freaking out because the Marxists are going to take away the nuclear family. I haven't seen any evidence of that, but it's ironic because they're usually religious, and it's like, well, Jesus really never cared about the nuclear family either, so I'm not sure why you're so pressed about it. Yeah, I think a lot of it kind of comes from a little bit of communal living, a little bit of Marxist stuff. Like, I mean, Jesus didn't know who Marx was, but I don't know. It seems like a lot of it has to do with like our ideas of love and who we should give love to, or like what we owe to people and what they owe us, are antithetical to the gospel.
Good.
According to Eagleton.
Well, excellent. So, I mean, we're talking about what does love mean? This is a very, this is a philosophical question we've waded into. English is a surprisingly impoverished language in some ways. We have a very robust vocabulary, and yet we use the word love very indiscriminately, right? I love my wife. I love my chickens, as you all know very well. I love the ravens. I love corned beef, and if my wife says to me, do you love me in the way you love corned beef? I better say no, right? If I know it's good for me. So we're very messy. That word is very messy. By the way, the technical biblical term for the love we're talking here, neighborly love, This is, oh, shit. Why am I blanking? All right, well, the New Testament was translated into Greek very early. And so the Greeks have a couple different words, right? In Greek, you have eros, which is romantic love. And then there's philia, which is brotherly love, right? Like in Philadelphia, they love each other in Philadelphia. I don't know if you ever noticed. It must be the cheesesteak. Then there is storge, which is like parental love, which is different. You know, they notice differences between each of these. And agape. Oh, if I was going to forget that, trouble. Agape is neighborly love. And it is not, that term is not, I teach a lot of Greek philosophy too, and that term is really not seen, certainly in Plato. It's not, I forget what it is originally, but it really only comes to be current. It's totally taken over by the Christians, and it is like, and when St. Paul, I mean, basically, what you all need to understand is St. Paul creates Christianity. Okay, I need to give you a very quick chronology. The letters of Paul are written first, and the Gospels come later. And there were like 25 Gospels, and they said only 4 Orthodox ones. They found another Gospel a few years ago. We think the Gospels are written around 60 to 100 AD. John was the last. The letters of Paul were written in the 50s. Who knows what Jesus was up to? I've read some archaeologists and some scholars, and they seem to think that he certainly was not interested in starting a new religion. He seemed to have his eye on reforming Judaism. He did not seem to be interested in political revolution, but there are varying interpretations. Paul is really the guy who does things differently, and unfortunately, when Paul dies, some people forge some of his letters, and so they credit him. He becomes credited with some unfortunate teachings later on in life. But Paul's vision was essentially a religion that is universal and that would transcend the bonds of nation and family, which was a tall order, right? When Paul lived in the Roman Empire, okay? And the Roman Empire, some historians have said, it was kind of like the first in the West. It was a form of globalization. You know, you had, I mean, the Roman roads are still used today. You have to understand, some of these roads still used. Some of their water systems are still used. They really built like this interconnecting infrastructure around the Mediterranean, and they brought people from Africa in contact with people from Asia, in contact with people from Britain and Europe and the Middle East. It was incredible. It was a cosmopolitan society. Cosmos politos, the city, the universe is your city, right? And what Paul initially does is he travels to the cities in Eastern Greece where there were Jewish populations. So he's visiting these outposts of the Roman Empire that have all kinds of different people in them. These are little cosmopolitan cities, like New York is kind of cosmopolitan. These were already cosmopolitan. And so he's talking about a kind of love that transcends the family and the nation. You know, he gets into a big fight with St. Peter about this. Peter says, listen, Jesus' gospel is only for the circumcised, i.e. the Jews. And Paul says, I don't believe so. I don't think it is. It was universal. Right? So it's really Paul is the one that is responsible for what we have here. Okay. Freud is the one who really clued me into this. In Civilization's Discontents, he points out that love of neighbor is outrageous, and it is outrageous. It is. The way it's outrageous is this. Well, neighbor is really kind of like, it doesn't really do it justice. In English, your neighbor, that's just your like person who lives next to you. You know what it really means? Your neighbor etymologically is the person in proximity to you. So when you're walking down the street, when you're walking at the mall, when you're in a fit of road rage on the highway, the person next to you, that's your neighbor. Guess what? You have to love that person. And what does love that person mean? Well, it seems to involve a little more than respect. That's the problem. I mentioned this earlier in class. I talked to you about Kierkegaard, where he gives writes his famous book about Abraham and Isaac. Like, remember, he was sitting in church one day and the pastor's like, Abraham took Isaac up the mountain and was going to slaughter him, but didn't. And Abraham is a model for us because he's a model of faith. And Kierkegaard sitting in the back row going, what the fuck are you talking about? This man is insane. Don't try to gloss this shit over. And that's what Eagleton is getting at here. Too many people, Christians and Dawkins alike, gloss over what love your neighbor means. What love your neighbor means is that what all these loves have in common, all of them, sacrifice. And if you're not sacrificing for the person that you're supposed to love, there's something wrong. And by the way, this is not always going to be good. This is not always going to be easy. As a Christian, I am called to love my neighbor, and my wife is not going to be psyched about that. Now, luckily, my neighbor is a 95-year-old man. She won't be jealous, but you know, what I'm getting at is this. Love tends to have, let me put it this way, romantic love involves partiality, as does parental love involves partiality. You know what I mean by that, right? My kid, best kid. I don't care. He might suck out in the soccer field. I'm like, best kid. My wife, she wants all my love. I may not share that love. I understand. My love is, it's pretty good. You know, my friend wants my love. Right, your friend, and you know what Jesus has come along and said. And by the way, there's an identical commandment in Buddhism where he talks about compassion in a similar way. And this gets to the point that Rebecca pointed out. You may not. You must, or let me put it this way, you must love everybody equally. You know how hard that is to do? That's actually impossible. In a way, almost. You know, that's what Freud says. Freud says this is impossible. But, you know, we haven't even talked about the worst one. I'm only talking about love of neighbor. Neighborly love is a bitch. I haven't even talked about the other one, y'all. Love of enemy. How's that possible? This is crazy. So basically, the point of it is this. The gospel, I mentioned Buddhism. In Buddhism, the Buddha talks about having compassion for all. You must have compassion for all things, not only people, but things that live, right? You must extend this love to all living things. That's very difficult too, being indiscriminate in that way. You know, so this is not only the domain of Christianity, and I will point out again that the social justice message in the gospel is rooted in the Old Testament. It's rooted in the prophets, Isaiah, Zechariah, Ezekiel. I was just reading them up on them this morning. And Jesus' message is essentially, you know, a real social justice message is very radical and very uncomfortable. And Eagleton's point is, you know, Dawkins, you missed that completely. You just don't get it. You don't get it at all, right? So here's a couple tasty quotes, page 22, middle of the page. He says, for Christian teaching, God's love and forgiveness are ruthlessly unforgiving powers, which break violently into our protective, self-rationalizing little sphere, smashing our sentimental illusions and turning our world brutally upside down. 4 lines down, he said, which is to say that those who are faithful to God's law of justice and compassion will be done away with by the state. If you don't love, you're dead. And if you do, they'll kill you. Here then is your pie in the sky, your opium of the people, your soft-eyed consolation and pale-cheeked piety. This is a rebuke not only to Dawkins, but to Freud. The old argument from Freud being when people can't handle reality, they turn to religion. His retort, reality is a piece of cake compared to what's being commanded here. The way you guys were describing God's creation as like an outrageous affair, Jesus was similarly outrageous. Someone asked for his cloak. He says, take my cloak and here's my coat too, right? The young rich man comes to him and says, what can I do to follow you? Jesus says, go give everything away. And the guy runs away crying, right? The sacrifices that you're called to do for this message is not okay. And this is what it's all about. It's not about proofs for the existence of God. It's not about that at all. So as many of you, I noticed in the chat very astutely pointed out, all too many Christians have ignored this too, right? They don't pay attention. They are misinterpreting it. I can't tell you how many times, well, I'm going to press this issue. A lot of Christians are going to give the tepid interpretation of love thy neighbor as don't judge, respect. It's not that, y'all. It is not that. It is not that at all. It's more. It's not just a passive acceptance. It's an active sacrifice. That was what's being commanded here. And this is not easy for anybody. Now, the reason that this is a problem for Dawkins, he will point out, and many of you noticed Marx, he thinks that the real problem is that our capitalist individualist society is not able for this anymore. And Dawkins is a sucker because he's just one more individualist. He's just one more rational individualist. He doesn't get it. He does not get the appeal of religion. He doesn't get the meaning of religion. He doesn't understand that people need this communitarian experience, or that people might be expressing despair. Here, some more tasty. Let me go on here and I have another tasty quote. He says, instead of mitigating the harshness of reality, he says, reality is a mitigation of the gospel's ruthless demands. That's on page 23. Instead of mitigating the harshness of reality, that's not what religion is supposed to do. It doesn't mitigate the harshness of reality. It says reality is a mitigation of the gospel's ruthless demands. We'll see when we get to Sermons of Buddha. Again, the Eightfold Path, not a walk, not a cakewalk. Quite the opposite, right? The life of many devout believers, not a cakewalk, right? He goes on to talk about the gospel's demands for us. They involve self-divestment, a kind of emptying of the self. St. Paul talked about kenosis. That's the Greek word, it means emptying. You must empty yourself. You must empty your ego. You must give everything away and live in communities. Paul talked about, undermining or separating yourself from your identity, basically, which was very important in the ancient Roman Empire. You were a Greek, you were a Jew, you were a Roman, you were this class, you were a slave, you were a citizen of the Roman Empire, or you were not. You were a man or a woman. And in one of the letters, Paul says, when you are baptized, you are no more Greek or Jew, you're no more man or woman, you're no more master or slave, you're just a person. It's all washed away. And the Romans, they couldn't deal with that. A lot of people could not deal with that. A lot of people still can't deal with that, right? So self-sacrifice in the gospel. You get self-divestment, you have celibacy and martyrdom. He talks about these as being, celibacy is a revolutionary option on page 25. I know we have revolutionaries at Micah. They're probably not interested in celibacy, but I'm just putting it out there. Just putting it out there. I am only moderately revolutionary. That's all I'm going to say about that. All right, here we go. Here is the revolutionary message to Pop of 27. That was my way of saying I can't deal with celibacy. Anyway, all right, page 27. About the revolutionary message of the gospel, bottom page. The New Testament is a brutal destroyer of human illusions. If you follow Jesus and don't end up dead, you have explaining to do. The stark signifier of the human condition is one who spoke up for love and justice and was done to death for his pains. The traumatic truth of human history is a mutilated body. Those who do not see this dreadful image of tortured innocent as the truth of history are likely to adopt some bright-eyed superstition, such as the dream of untrammeled human progress, for which, as we shall see, Ditchkins is a full-blooded apologist. Right. And he has this beautiful quote later on where he talks about, is this, yeah, page 37, I'll touch on this as well. He says, you know, taking a major dig at Ditchkins and their view of progress. The bottom of 37, he says, Christian faith, as I understand, is not primarily a matter of signing on for the proposition that God exists, but the kind of commitment may manifest by a human being at the end of his tether, foundering in the darkness, pain and bewilderment, who nevertheless remains faithful to the promise of a transformative love, right? It's our existential condition. This is what primarily drives people to religion. The trouble with Dawkins of this world is they don't find themselves in a frightful situation. Beyond the fact there are a lot of semi-deranged people called believers around the place, it's natural then that they have no use for such embarrassingly old-fashioned ideas as depravity and redemption. Even after Auschwitz, there's nothing in their view to be redeemed from. That was a, just in case you didn't catch it, that was a major burn. That's like top 10-degree burn right there. Like, redemption is about our existential condition, right? Christianity keeps meaning, has meaning because of our existential condition. That's not changing. You know, there's only, you know, science will never figure that out, right? Let me pause for a second, see if I'm kind of ranting here. Get very passionate about this stuff. Do I want to speak up? Questions or comments? No? All right. Well, let me wind this down and we can pick it up next week. But I do want to touch on something that Rebecca pointed out. And it's funny, like I remember sitting in church a few years ago and hearing this, one of the readings about Jesus on the family. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Because there is a common perception in American culture that Christians are family-centered people, right? Focus on the family. You probably heard of Focus on the Family. It's a big Christian outfit based in Colorado. Well, you know, Eagleton's right. Jesus is not pro-family. I'm not sure where that misconception, I mean, there are some passages that I had to, here's what I did, people, I Googled Jesus, love your parents. So there are plenty of passages that say this, you know, but then there is Matthew 10:17. 37. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Damn. Okay. And then let me see if I can get this one here. Here, look at Luke 14:26. This is even worse. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. So the revolutionary proposition in the gospel is that the command of justice transcends your marriage, your family, your tribe, your nation, right? It's a call to justice. Right. So there's a lot more to say, but I think I'm gonna keep it for next week where we can dive in some deeper. Okay. Anybody have any questions here? Last minute or two, or comments? Anything you want to say? Brittany's hungry. Good. Me too. I'm just warning you all. This is just a warning. As Easter approaches, I'm going to ask you to watch my favorite movie of all time. Putting it in the chat. Jesus Christ Superstar. Fucking love. I can sing it from beginning to end. And I once did in my dorm room, and my neighbors got very upset with me. Movie made by Norman Jewison back in 1970. He flew to Israel to film it. It is the most remarkable exhibition of hippie love you'll ever see. It is just, yeah, Em is right. It's awesome. Any case, I'm done. Okay. I'm gonna let you all go. I will stick around. So if anybody wants to talk, you may chat with me. Okay. And I think someone did have a question. So I'll see you all next week. You know what you have to do. All
Thanks,
right.
Norman. Have a good one.
Take care, guys. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
Bye. Ooh, Furman.
No.
What was it? I think I got it right. Okay, I found the pages are right when you were reading the
Yeah?
quote. I found them. Yeah, so it's good. It's all good.
Okay, cool. All right.
you.
Well, email me if anything happens.
See you.
Bye. Take care. Yes, Freya. Hello?